Welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. This episode is sponsored by Springs Mental Health Summit, a summit for parents, teachers, neighbors, and friends to talk about mental health in our community. For more information, go to springsummit.org. Here's your host, Trever Sharon.
Welcome back. We are continuing a conversation that we have had previously about race and racism with a counselor here at Mayfield Counseling Centers, Shayne Stuart. Welcome back. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. This is fun.
We talked the last two parts of this series about microaggressions, interracial marriage. We talked about the national anthem and the protests that have happened in the NFL and some of the meaning behind it. And the importance of just having honest conversations in a positive way about the subject of race and racism.
Right.
And we ended last part pretty abruptly going into white privilege, and just the history that we have as humanity when it comes to race and the harm and the turmoil and the tragedy that has happened based on race, and what we can do today to have discussions around where we are now and where we have been and where we can be in the future. So we want to pick up right there. Mark, you ended the last part talking about white privilege and privilege in general. Would you mind reiterating what you mentioned last time?
Well, absolutely, and I want to kind of put a preface to this, is that this is some things that I've taken a lot of time to work through my multicultural classes in my master's program, my PhD program, and so I don't expect our listeners to go, "Oh crap, did I miss out on something?" Well, no, if you don't ever have that brought up, or that is something that you've been confronted with in a positive way. Like, again, confrontation is not a bad thing. It's how it's done and how it's taken. I want this to maybe a time for us to pause. And I also want our listeners to right up front, because I know there are going to be some listeners that are going to want to turn this off and not listen to it, which I want to encourage to stay through, because white privilege and white supremacy are two completely different things.
Completely.
Now, one mishandled could lead to the other. Right, so white privilege mishandled and not done well, or even conversed about, could turn into white supremacy. But we're not talking about white supremacy today. That's a whole nother conversation of some major atrocities that are still going on in our communities. In that sense, we're talking about white privilege. And I've taught this class at the university. I know that you and I sat in together in a class with one of our heroes and mentors, Reggie Moore, and it produces a visceral response among especially white males. And I remember my response to it back when I was in grad school. It set me kind of awry a little bit, and I'm sitting there, I'm long enough I got to remember that I was able to kind of take a step back and think about it. But it was almost, it initially felt accusatory, because, like Trever said, you said at the end of the last one, is, I can't be responsible for what happened before I was born, but what I have to do with it now, it makes all the difference. And I think that's what I want our listeners to hear. It's coming to grips with the history. It's in some ways even kind of in a melancholic, almost reflective, grieving stage of what our history has been, and going, now what can we do with it? Is that kind of engage me in the conversation a little bit, Shayne, and kind of what we've talked about in the past, and kind of what you've seen in these classes that we've taken, and just your own experience too?
Absolutely. It's definitely a different topic sitting on this side of that divide, because there are some individuals in which having a conversation about they oftentimes can't go much deeper because they're stuck or wrestling with, or I don't want to say ignore, but they cast it aside and not really in a place to try and wrestle and deal with the privilege and such. And especially considering the classes where I've been, especially social cultural class, there's been times where I kind of sit back and look and see what the reactions are when these things come up from a professor. and it's interesting. Not interesting in a comical way, not interesting in a voyeuristic way, but definitely interesting just thoughtfully of how some individuals will shift in their chair a little bit, or how some individuals will ask questions and to try to understand deeper, and then other individuals that remain oh so quiet. And it's the quiet ones I wonder the most about. Like, what are you thinking? Why are you not engaging? What's going on with you? Is there some dissonance going on with this? And if so, I'd like to know, not to point any fingers or poke at it, but to be able to see, man, is there any questions I can help answer?
Absolutely.
Is there a way that I can engage you in your process right now? Because you're definitely in a process.
Absolutely. And I remember when I was going through that process, I didn't know how to discuss it, how to verbally get it out. And I remember Dr. Moore, Reggie Moore, just start, try, just begin. And one of the things, at least for me, and I know we talked about this in part one of this a little bit, but I came to grips with the fact that the color of my skin and the fact that I'm a male has afforded me opportunities that somebody of a African American or Latino, Hispanic, or a person of color in any stretch, any of the spectrum, had to work harder at, or hasn't been given those same opportunities, and that made me sad. And at first I tried to wish it away or logically make my way through it, but then I had to come to the conclusion, no, that's just the way it is in our society right now, and that's the way it's been. And I can either fight that, embrace it, and then do something with it. And I think that was my journey of going, okay, yes, I'm a white male that has, it wasn't hard to get into college. It wasn't hard to get my first job. It wasn't hard to make these strides. And it is, and it continues to be for others. So the conclusion I came to, and the one that I really try to espouse as best I can now, and I know I'm not doing as great of a job as I could, is how do I use that to help empower, break down social stigmas and social norms, those that don't have a voice, or the voice is muted, or a lot harder to get to that same spot.
Well, and I wonder, Shayne, how many of those individuals in those classes, when this comes up, who are silent, are struggling like I did of the guilt that comes with that. Whether it's appropriate or not, there's a sense of guilt as a white male, knowing that I have been given things without even acknowledging that I've been giving them, that were given to me in part because of the slavery of African Americans and the oppression of other races, and the oppression of women too. And
absolutely.
There's a feeling of ownership or guilt of like, I'm a part of this and I don't really want to be a part of this.
I think ownership is good. Guilt is not. Well, let me rephrase that. I think ownership is good, and guilt to a point is good. But I think when that guilt turns to shame, then that's when it becomes bad.
Yeah. So one part of it, especially hearing both of y'all, is at least coming to a place of that curiosity again, understanding, and wanting to have the conversations. There's individuals, and I feel it's important to bring this point out, that there absolutely are a whole lot of white males, white ladies, as a matter of fact, that do a lot of hard work, that are out there grinding, they're doing a lot of stuff. So to those individuals, I would say this. Yes, I see the hard work in which you've done in order to get to the positions and where you have been. But I will also go ahead and bring it to this particular point. Appearance and perception are huge in this. And so this is where this comes into the conversation. If we look from a place of appearance, if we look at it from a heterosexual standpoint, what is one of the first things in which, if we're going on a date, specifically a blind date, that catches our eye first? Appearance. Before even the first words are uttered out of an individual's mouth, we've seen this individual and have made certain judgments by what they look like. And because of that, if we can look at it from that specific lens, then can it be real that when you are an employer and you have some individuals that are going for a position that you put up, how likely then is it that you might go for somebody who might have your same appearance, or an individual that might immediately appeal to you, as opposed to another individual that does not quite appeal to you immediately? So that, from that specific lens, is how a lot of people get cast aside, marginalized, because appearance is huge, and it oftentimes is first.
I'm reminded of a statistic that says that it takes us about 1/100th of a second to recognize facial features on somebody, and it takes us 1/300th of a second to make a presumption about that.
Right.
And so I think that goes very well into what you're saying, is that and this is where these conversations and laying the foundation long before you get to that point is so important, because those internal unconfronted biases or stereotypes that we might have because of how we were raised, the cultures we grew up in, it's going to affect what you just talked about. And so until we reflect on ourselves and do some deep soul searching, that 1/100th, 1/300th of a second is going to kind of rule how we do things.
Given an example, a specific experience that I had back in high school, we had a work release program in which, as a junior and a senior, you did work, you went to school, but then you were also able to have a part-time job. And so there was one time I was up for one of these positions. There was 3 positions that was open in this place, and I won't put the business out there because it'll be petty if I did. But there was 3 positions that were advertised that was open. There was 8 individuals in the room up for the positions. There was 6 of us that were African American and 2 that were white males, Caucasians. Interview process went through and everything. Well, I will go ahead and say that first 2 individuals came out, a secretary and I guess another person in the hiring position that came in, saw everybody, and then started bringing folks in one at a time. There was no particular order, at least I don't think, from it. But what ultimately happened was that at the end, all of us were still in the room after everything was done, and it came out to us, and we found out that the 2 Caucasian guys were hired, and that 3rd position mysteriously was not needed. Now,
Wow.
Now, there are certain conclusions that could be drawn from that, and that does not necessarily have to be racial. I don't know all of the parts that happen behind the scenes. I do not. However, there is that one question of, okay, wait, hold on. If there were 3, but now after all the interviewing process, you only have 2 and you took the 2 Caucasian guys, that does give an air of, okay, perhaps this was a racial thing.
Well, and I think it's important that you bring that up because I think it does go both ways with appearance too. I know that there's been a lot of situations where a really qualified guy is up for a position and then they hire somebody of a minority because of some program that the company has,
right,
who may not be as qualified. I think we've even had these conversations where it's somebody who's not nearly as qualified,
right,
but got it out of that desire for appearances, and that it's not necessarily pointed towards just African Americans, right, or towards Caucasians. It's the appearance of what are our motivations behind that hiring process?
Right.
What are our motivations in choosing this person and not this person, or these 2 people out of these 8 people?
Well, it goes back to the fact that I think the original intent of that program is great. It's right. It's helping bring to light the fact that we just, like you just brought up. But like everything, it gets tainted or slanted, and it becomes then a divisive issue, which it shouldn't be.
Right.
But I think too, Shayne, I want to bring up the fact that when I've worked through the kind of the white privilege piece too, is that the conversations we've had about just, walking down the street or getting pulled over by a police officer and things that I've never ever considered as something that I need to be worried about.
Right.
Right. That you have shared with me, that you pause and you think about how do I react and handle this? And so, I don't know if you want to share anything, around that piece too, but that comes to, not only is it a job thing or a school thing, it's just an everyday life past because of the color of my skin. And again, it's not right. We have to own up to what is right now.
For sure. So there is a level of hyper awareness that I believe I have to walk around with just because of the color of my skin. So it makes no sense just to put that out there without giving an example. So back in Brooklyn, I had to walk up and down the street. And even though in my neighborhood there was more individuals of my skin color, I still had to be aware because there were many more Caucasian police officers that were around. And back in Brooklyn during the 80s and 90s, there was a certain propensity for police brutality against African-American males, whether it was founded or not. And so I had to walk around and make certain that I was being on my P's and Q's, to make sure that I was absolutely correct. And even when I was absolutely correct, there was still that fear of, is it today the day that I'm going to get pulled over off of some trumped up charges after some bogus questions and such? This stuff happened back in the South Central, LA, or just all over the nation, but definitely in these neighborhoods. And so there's a hyper awareness in which I've had to live my life on. And to a certain degree, that brings a level of trauma into it as well. Secondary trauma. There are all manner of different things where other folks can go ahead and walk up and down the street and not have to worry about if they're doing fine. If they're not jaywalking, they're fine. They're not going to go ahead and get pulled over. Me, I better not jaywalk because there may be that might be the time in where I get pulled over to the side and get harassed or worse, simply because of my appearance and where I am. And so I've had to do that out there back in the East Coast and traveling this world in the military and to a certain degree still here in Colorado, just to be aware and make certain that I don't draw any type of attention to myself or I won't say attention, won't draw any negative attention to myself.
Well, and that's what I want our listeners to understand is maybe they're listening, there's this sense of frustration or injustice that's rising up in them as they're listening to, like, that's not the country I want to live in. This is not what, and I want you as listeners to realize that that's a good thing that's rising up inside of you. And so what do you do? How do you help change or craft the society that you want to live in? And I also want to say too that I recognize that these topics can be divisive in the media, and a lot of times politics uses them as a divisiveness. You hear a lot of times that somebody pulled the race card, and I want people to slow down and go, there's got to be truth to that to some level, right? And do your own research. Just don't dismiss it as, well, they just pulled the race card.
Right. Absolutely. Ask the question. I mean, let's get to a point where we can start asking honest questions. And I will go ahead and openly put out there are individuals that willfully pull the race card and there's no race part about it. I absolutely know that there's individuals that use it to their advantage. However, that does not negate all the other individuals that actually have experiences that warrant that, hey, this is happening because more than likely of this reason. Or disprove me. If it's not for this reason, disprove me. I live my life in such a way that I believe I live my life in such a way that not much fault can come towards me. I'm not trying to rob any stores or anything along those lines. But if I'm walking down the street and there's a comedian out there that says it so well, that if I drop my wallet and the police are around, I know not to pick it up with my hands. I'm going to kick that bad boy on the way home because if I reach for it, something might happen. And I laugh about it, but there's also a tragedy about that as well, as far as the state of where we are in this nation today.
Yeah. That goes back to exactly what I was talking about, of that, just the injustice of where we have been and where we are even today is so saddening that there have been artificial barriers built between you and I, Shayne,
right,
that we have to intentionally tear down on both sides
yes,
before we can connect in the way that we should be able to.
Right.
And hopefully in these conversations, our listeners have been able to recognize those barriers and understand the importance of tearing those down from an individual perspective.
Right.
You, Shayne, and me, Trever, of two individuals who have these conversations and recognize that barrier and tear it down, and then begin to have deeper and more meaningful conversations in relationship because we've put in the effort in that.
And I think, the conversations I've had with others is that, we're appalled that racism still exists. I'm like, good, be appalled, but don't deny it,
Right.
because it's going to be in our society just by the human nature. But I also want to encourage us that Dr. King, brought it to the forefront,
Right.
and began this movement of, in a lot of ways, the conversations that we're having now, are happening and need to continue to happen because of the work that he did.
Right.
But it's never we can't get complacent.
No.
It's never gonna be over. Nor should it be, because we need to be talking about.
Right.
I would love it if there was a day where there was no microaggressions or racism. I don't know if that's going to happen this side of eternity.
Right.
But we also need to recognize that we have the ability and the power to continue in these conversations. And that's where, if injustices or frustrations have risen up in any of our listeners, this is what you do about it.
Right.
Just sit and have conversations, engage your neighbor, your friend, if you go to the same grocery store every week, engage your clerk, or find ways to continue these conversations.
Yeah. So in a lot of what we've been talking about, if I can just go ahead and speak to the listeners real quick concerning what to do next. For one, have hope. Be curious. I want to have these conversations, and I eagerly look for people to have these conversations with me and people like myself who want to have a better way ahead. The direction where we're going right now is not the greatest. There has to be change, and the change starts with us. You, I, all of us here in this room, and everybody out there. And so if you see me walk up and down the street for whatever reason doing something, pull me over. I want to have these conversations. I want us to have greater understanding, not just from you understanding more of me, but me understanding more of you as well, because I'm not the end all be all of understanding every culture out there. There's things I would want to continue to learn about as far as growing up in the Midwest or growing up in the barrio. Just want to be able to have greater understanding, and so we can work on these things together. It's not going to get better unless we all come to the table and forge through understanding, but also forging a better and greater path ahead.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, go to mayfieldcounseling.com/Candid Conversations and check out our Facebook page, Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield.